Recording in progress.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Louisville Historic Preservation Meeting. It is July 15th, 2024, and I'd like to call tonight's meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission to order. We do a roll call?
Commissioner Whidden.
Here.
Commissioner Berg.
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
Commissioner Beaucamp.
Here.
Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Chair Haley.
Here.
Great, thank you. Would a commissioner like to approve tonight's agenda?
I would move to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you. Before we begin with our first public hearing, are there any public comments?
In addition to a motion that we should approve the agenda.
Oh, I'd like to make a motion that we approve tonight's agenda.
Well, we need to vote on
Oh,
it.
we need to vote. We need to vote on it? Thank you.
It's a roll call usually. Voice?
Voice
Okay.
vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. That's good. Okay, thank you. Before we begin with our public hearing, are there any public comments on items not on tonight's agenda? There's nobody in attendance in person, none online? Okay, great. Okay, so we have a public hearing tonight for 917 Rex Street. That is a landmark, an alteration certificate, and a preservation and restoration grant, and we will hear from staff.
I'm going to ask for disclosures while I pull this up.
Okay. Do we have any disclosures?
No.
No? No conflicts? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Vice Chair and Commissioners. Yes, so this is a landmark alteration certificate and preservation and restoration grant request for the property at 917 Rex Street. So just to start a little bit about the conditions over time. So we've got an undated photo up there on the top right, but then the 1948 assessor's photo on the left, and then a somewhat current photo on the bottom right. There's no major changes that show up in the building permit record, although as you can see, there has been a porch added to one side, and certainly some changes made to the front porch as well. And then there's been some changes to the siding and a number of other sort of small changes, but to the structure itself and the form, it looks like it remains intact, at least from the mid-century, if not earlier. So in terms of the landmark criteria here, I'm going to divide some of this into the primary structure and then some of it into the garage, just for your information. But before I get into that, just a reminder that landmarks do apply to the entire property. And so the reason here that I've broken it out into primary and garage is because the grant request specifies some preservation and restoration work on the garage. So it's the only reason why I'm doing it, just to give you that background for you to be able to evaluate the grant. But again, regardless of whether regardless of the garage's historic significance, the whole property would be landmarked. So the primary structure was built in 1936, about 88 years old. The garage was placed on the property sometime before 1948, so it's at least 76 years old. The architectural significance, this primary structure has that bungalow style that we're familiar with, relatively little ornamentation. The garage has some ornamentation in this unique sort of barn door style, clipped gable. And so the physical integrity, as I mentioned, minor exterior changes only. And then in terms of the social significance, you read about the mining history and then also the French immigration to Louisville that's associated with this neighborhood and also this property. So the alteration certificate covers a number of different changes. One are rear additions to the house and also to the garage. Staff finds that both of these additions have a minimal impact on the structure. They are differentiated in style from the historic portions of the structures, and they are also on the rear of both of the structures. There's also a proposal to alter the side patio, so removing that side patio and the front porch railings on the house. They're not original, and overall, the changes that are being proposed are back to an earlier period. And so staff finds that those are also in line with the general restoration of the building. And then the final is to make alterations to the doors and the windows in the house and the garage. And so the application specifies that it would preserve existing historic materials wherever possible, and there are some existing original windows and doors, and then removes the non-historic elements that are there currently. Show you some photos. So here you've got the elevations that show a little bit more of the additions. And again, this is on the rear of the house and also the garage. And this gives you a bit more of a sense of what the alterations to the front facade would look like. So removing that covered porch on the side and then removing the railings on the front of the house. So then finally, there's also a grant request. The request is for $162,446. That's up to and would be matching. And so, of course, this is under extraordinary circumstances. It's greater than the max of $40,000. Staff went through, as usual, and looked to ensure that all the work was mentioned or described as necessary in the historic structure assessment, and that it all related to one of the categories, preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation. So just a brief reminder, extraordinary circumstances, the only language we have to rely on is the language that's currently in the resolution upon a showing of extraordinary circumstances relating to building size, condition, architectural details, or other unique condition compared to similar Louisville properties. That is the only language they have operate on here. A couple things about that. One is when staff looks at these extraordinary circumstances, we really rely on, does it relate to the size of the structure or the structures in this case, their condition, whether the details that are being preserved or restored, they have some sort of extraordinary, unique aspect to them. And then there's also this other unique condition language to broaden it out. But in general here, we've looked at size, condition, and architectural details. And then there's also this language about being compared to similar Louisville properties. So the applicant put together, the application that specified this is the average cost and this is what's extraordinary circumstances based on their experience. The way that staff looks at this from a different lens, but it's sort of a compatible lens, I think, is to look at what has been approved and requested in other circumstances. So not to set precedent here at all, but just to say that, okay, well, what do other people request? How many partial foundations versus full foundations, that kind of thing. And that's how we, as staff, try to compare it to other Louisville properties. So with all that said, I'll get a bit more into the extraordinary circumstances. So staff is recommending an amount a little bit less than what was requested. A reminder was like $162,000 and change. Staff is recommending $154,000 and change because, again, using that analysis largely in comparison to other properties and that language, staff finds that these categories, so site grading, drainage, exterior appendages, and exterior details, do not qualify for the extraordinary circumstances language. I'm happy to answer more questions about how I tried to evaluate that. It's described more in your staff report as well. Everything else relates to the structural requests. Tried to group those together. That in large part, this is a request to do full structural work on two structures, both the house and the garage. And so that would meet extraordinary circumstances based on size and condition. And then the ones that relate to restoration and preservation directly staff finds qualify based on, again, that scope, sort of the size of having two buildings to work with, and then also the preservation of our existing architectural details in particular. And again, roofing and waterproofing, these are to cover two structures, which is sort of extraordinary. It's not common. I'm not aware that that's happened before, although of course it might have. So that's how we evaluated. And then I will just reiterate again, because this one's a little bit different, that this is why I mentioned the architectural significance potential for the garage itself, because that's, I think, a question right tonight is that of value is that of historic value? And so that's why we sort of brought up the architectural details of the garage earlier in the presentation. Finally, I just want to say, so up here is this 3 letters of support. I believe actually there are a total of 6 now. And so you received via email and then also just The ones that came in today are up on the dais and also sent via email earlier. All of these are from neighbors and people in the community who support the request that the applicant's making overall. So just in summary there, staff is recommending approval of Resolution 4, which would recommend approval of the landmark to be named for the Wurmberg family. Approval of Resolution, I'm going to have to do some math here because 4 to 6 doesn't make any sense. So approval of some resolution number, which would approve the alteration certificate, and then approval of that third resolution, and I will step and get you the right numbers, which would recommend approval of a grant of up to $154,000, $154,220. I do want to say, if you are interested in approving a different amount, you just need to make a condition on that resolution and then staff will redraft it for you. So I'm happy to take any questions. The applicant is present tonight as well and has a presentation.
I have a question about the garage because the dates are very close. Is there reason to believe that that was not built at the same time as the primary structure?
Yeah, so I don't have a reason to think it wasn't built at the same time. Absolutely, it's like maybe 12 years, potentially. So, and the applicant might have more information about that, having conducted the HSA.
I have a question. So just to clarify, the what's not recommended is just the site grading, the exterior appendages, and the exterior details, simply because that's not extraordinary. That's something that typically happens on other projects as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, they're not all exactly the same. I think the site grading and drainage is what from staff's,
Right.
review, that is, I think, pretty standard. But the exterior appendages and exterior details, again, yes, not finding that it qualifies for extraordinary circumstance, but it doesn't. Some of this staff is recommending restoration coverage and some of it isn't, and that's a little bit of the art of trying to figure out what's comparable and what isn't. But yes, anyway, all of that's just extraordinary circumstances. It does qualify strictly under preservation and restoration.
Thank you.
Do any other commissioners have questions for staff?
Maybe I would, maybe as part for our own discussion, but it is like we're setting some precedents as we do these things. And as Amelia mentioned, we're looking back at the precedents of prior uses of extraordinary circumstances. And she was mentioning that the wording we have, it includes size and condition, but extraordinary circumstances is pretty well accepted as something that happened that someone with an ordinary, a regular due diligence would have seen anyway. So anyway, ignoring that, size is what's used here. This isn't a particularly large structure, I would say, compared to the neighborhood. So how is size being used as an extraordinary circumstance, other than it's a lot of money?
Absolutely, yeah, these are great questions. So first of all, I want to clarify, I'm trying to be specific here that that case to case, not setting precedent. And so just because you did something in the past doesn't mean you have to do it now. It's all case by case. However, the way that staff reviews this to try to give you our recommendation, part of it does rely on, okay, well, is it typical for a full foundation to need to be replaced? I'm giving you for example, right? And I think arguably we're seeing a lot of full foundation requests at this point, but certainly I think the baseline is, maybe shoring up one portion of the foundation. That might be more typical, but then having to move an entire structure and replace the entire foundation would fall into extraordinary. That's an example. Or having to replace all of the windows on a house rather than having to replace one or two windows. So that's kind of just, again, an example of how to use the language that we have, how we use the comparison to other properties. And also, then to answer the other part of your question, in this case, so I have to look back at it quickly here, but it's not just size. I think we used size, condition, and then, I think it was size and condition primarily. The size is not just the primary structure, it's the fact that the grant would cover both the primary and the garage. So as a total square footage, that is where the larger size comes from because the request is for both structures.
The language to me, at least when I read it, it's or. It's not all. Am I understanding that correct? You don't have to meet every attribute in that list. You have to meet one of them.
Right.
Correct,
The
yes.
size is what's called out.
Yeah.
Right, that's correct, though.
Okay, now, in the structural assessment, it found that the garage was sitting on a slab in a different location than the garage as proposed now on a new foundation. So how does that become, rehabilitation or restoration? It's like it's something new. That's it's not the same garage on the same foundation, yet there's a big chunk of money for the foundation, as well as moving the structure that's on top of it.
So I think for the specifics of the garage foundation, I definitely defer to the applicant to be able to describe that. I would say in general, having a new foundation on a historic structure is very much a preservation, in some cases rehabilitation, but in this case preservation practice, right? Because the foundation's crumbling, it's a danger to the structure and it's not able to be used. So I think that's a general response, but again, this question about the slab, I would just defer to the applicant. They have much better knowledge.
Yeah, it wasn't really a foundation. Well, if you call it slab, a foundation. And it's also being moved so it can meet the setback, and I understand that, but it's sort of different than preservation. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, it also includes roofing, and I didn't think we typically did roofing. And we had some discussion at one of the recent meetings about that. That we were not sure if we wanted to get into the business of putting new roofs on structures that were preserved or being landmarked. And I don't remember how that shook out, but this is definitely including roofing. And we also have had similar discussions about interior work not being covered, and yet here we have drywall and insulation being included in the request.
So the question, it sounds like, is how are these things related to preservation or restoration?
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I think some of these things weren't really stated in our charter, but we've had a precedent of not including interior work and paint and things like that.
Right. So I think the interior work is like redoing floors inside or like redoing a bathroom or something like that. Those pieces or paint inside or outside, that's not included. I mean, sometimes paint outside can be included if it's part of, preserving a material or updating a material. But just to keep it really clear, if you want to demo the inside of your house and make it look super modern and new inside or change it completely, that's not covered. But things that do occur on the inside of the house technically that relate to fixing the walls, or rehabilitating it to make it functional for today, like those things can be covered. For example, HVAC can be covered sometimes, or updating copper wiring, things like that. Those are inside of the house, but they can relate to reusing or preserving the house. So whether or not that's satisfied here, I think is a great conversation for your discussion. But I think in general, certainly it's possible to have things that are literally inside be part of preservation or restoration or rehabilitation.
Okay. Things to discuss.
And what about the roofing? How does that play into it?
Yeah, so I think so when, in reviewing this, and again, I would ask to defer the specifics to the applicant, but in general, looking at things that relate to preserving the existing house or making it livable and usable, such as, I'm remembering that waterproofing is part of this request, and I'd have to sit back and actually read the request again to get super detailed on it. But like things that relate to, okay, making it functional and making it last longer, those can go toward this grant. But then doing something like if you just want to re-roof your house and there's no way that it's in fine condition and you want to change it to green shingles or something, I mean, that part wouldn't be covered. But in this case, I think when staff was doing the review, it relates to trying to update the house and make it possible to, exist in the future with the water issues and other issues. So I'd have to look again and reread the application, but I would just say the applicant's probably the best one to get really detailed on that.
Okay, we'll ask them then.
So if there's no other questions for staff from commissioners, we do have the architect, the applicant and their architect here. So if you'd like to come up and speak. And can you please just state your name and city of residence?
Is it this?
Oh, yeah. I've never done this.
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah, all right, great. Okay, my name's Andy Johnson. I'm with DAJ Design here in Louisville, Colorado. Thank you, Amelia. Staff has always been great working through these applications with us. I'm here with the owner of 917 Rex, Talbot Wilt. Some of you might remember Talbot as a return customer to the Historic Preservation program. Back in 2020, we landmarked, did a grant request for 908 Rex, which is right across the street. So, round two. Also, I'm joined, I believe, online by Josh Johnston, also from DAJ Design. I think Talbot and I will be the main presenters tonight, though. Okay. I took notes from the questions to staff, and we'll be happy to answer those in the order that they came, and we'll do that kind of towards the end on a particular slide that I have set up. All right, so you can see where 917 is located within the Old Town overlay, very close to Community Park, in what was kind of the French Quarter of Louisville. Showing a few images that have already been shown. I think what's interesting about this house is that when you look at the county assessor record, that plan is pretty clean. Normally we see lots of eraser marks and red and other different colors that indicate changes over time. However, it was our belief that, that this home was largely built all at once. Typically, accessory structures were not included in these assessor records. So it was not a site plan. This is just a plan of the primary structure. Images of the home as it's been seen for a number of years, showing the added railing to what was essentially a pretty original home. The railing with the tombstone or surfboard decor is something that we'll get into in a little bit. Looking at the home from different perspectives, there was a lean-to roof that enclosed what was a concrete patio, and that was obviously added at a much later date, to which we're not entirely sure. And then, of course, there's the garage, which we believe, we have no indication really to show that it wasn't built at the same time, but has some really cool functioning sliding doors and has its own fun patina to kind of work through as a preservation effort. If you study the HSA, you'll have seen our floor plan. The red over the existing floor plan indicates what was originally built. The orange is what was added onto. The floor plans as we go from basement, main level to roof look like this. This is one of those homes that was built during a decade where basements started to become a thing. We went from crawl spaces to kind of low basements. Why they didn't go another foot down or another foot and a half down to actually make it proper and habitable is still a question. There is a coal chute that looks like it was potentially added on at a later date. Maybe it was built originally. That is not shown on this plan, but was uncovered during some demolition work. Main level plan is largely as it was when it was originally built. Our proposed plan, by comparison to the existing, shows all of our additions are towards the rear of this house. So we are proposing to add on to the rear of the house with a fairly modest size addition. We are looking at doing preservation work to the studio. I will talk about its placement in just a moment, and we are looking at adding a garage off of the alley. So pretty much everything above that red line is new, except for the studio, which is of course existing, however, in a slightly different location. As a part of the HSA, we always do a front elevation study in comparison. So you can see the to-scale drawing of the existing house with it being compared to what we call the preserved elevation. And so lots of similarities. Obviously, we get to see that kind of rear entry, which we would now call a mudroom entry, being exposed once that lean-to addition is removed. Walking around the building from an elevation perspective, looking at those comparisons from existing to what's being proposed, I want to point out a few things that are important. And one of the kind of features of the studio that I think is really special. So starting with the house, though, the house is largely going to remain pretty existing in a lot of ways. We're going to remove that lean-to. We're going to expose that rear entry door. We are considering doing preservation efforts to all the windows. They're all weighted windows. They all function. We have one window where the weights, the ropes got snipped on the front window. However, those would be fairly easy to replace. And they are surprisingly in good shape. So we've done a little bit more analysis on that. And I think there's going to be probably a little pivot around looking at the cost difference between preservation of those windows and adding storm windows to help with the thermal efficiency, prevent condensation in the wintertime, which will help with the decay of the walls and the trim and just the overall window structure. So that's something that we're actually really excited about pursuing. The studio, however, what we're calling the studio is the old garage. It has two functioning doors with tracks that actually still work. The doors had been buried in, dirt and backfill and things just kind of building up over the building over the years. And we're really excited about reusing them. So what we're planning on doing is we're going to take both doors, refinish them. We're not changing the wood. We're going to largely use everything that's there. We are going to take out those center flat wood panels, and we're going to use these as our windows. So on the right-hand side where you can see the pointer, we're going to knock out those windows and we're going to make those direct set windows. So we're going to stop in glass in those panes. And then the panel that's to the left, that's going to be the operable panel. So the right panel will become part of the siding of this accessory structure. And then that left panel is the operable one, and that will cover a sliding glass door on the inside, but when it's closed, it'll look like the original garage. The difference between the house and the garage right now is that the garage is clad in the old Dutch Cove wood siding. We believe that under the stucco, that this home was originally clad in the Dutch Cove wood siding. We have every indication to believe that it was stuccoed because of the deterioration of that siding. And also, we believe that that was done prior to that 50-year mark and likely prior to that 1948 photo. So that original stucco is fairly old, and we intend to keep that. So we really want to try to keep as much of that current exterior as it is now. Again, walking around the building, the rear is where you see the biggest change to the house. If you notice, what we've done is we've created what we kind of call like a notch. So there's a little stepped in and lowered portion of the addition before it goes to the higher part of the addition to really allow the existing house to stand by itself and be very easily identified as the original structure. A couple perspective views, looking at the front and then that side view. One of the materials that we are proposing that will help differentiate the new addition, not only in the form, but also in the siding, we are proposing using this square notch channel siding, vertical, in these new additions. It'll also be on the garage. The new garage, the existing garage will have the Dutch Cove siding. Oops. A little bit of zoning information. It's a lot to take in, a lot of numbers. I think the highlights here are that when we look at the lot coverage from a zoning perspective, we are below our allowable FAR within that overall footprint. Since this is a single level structure, the lot coverage actually is meaningful as it compares to the floor area ratio. This is a gross calculation, so this does include the exterior walls, whereas the floor area ratio does not. It's measured from the inside face of wall. Currently, our FAR is at, we have basically 17.8 left in our allowable FAR. So under what we used to use as the new construction grant, this would actually qualify since it is, we have more than the 10% left in the floor area ratio. Okay, so one of the big parts of this whole project is the house move component. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail when we get to the budget part, but we did a house relocation plan where when it was determined that the foundation, particularly on the west side, was leaning, was cracked, and was incredibly brittle concrete, and it was determined to replace the foundation, and you're going to see some images of this in just a little bit, that we would basically slide this house back all the way to the alley, to the rear property line, and also take the detached garage and slide that back. When we looked at bringing the studio back, the desire was to have it brought back to its original location. We have a whole bunch of issues to have to solve when we do that. Fireproofing is one, so there's a fire life safety component. We have overhangs that are non-conforming and go over the property line in its current location. And we are far from meeting the zoning requirements by putting it back in its original location. So code wants us to put it in an area that at least meets the minimum zoning setbacks. Obviously, there are lots of historic structures that probably have a non-conforming component. These homes are not being moved. They may be added onto, but if we're moving a home, if we're doing that much work, I think the consideration needs to be made around how do we make this safe, how do we make it compliant, and do the minimum amount to make that happen. The house goes back to exactly its location. So looking at the primary structure with some destructive demolition, you can see that the front porch is in a very serious deteriorating condition. What's a little hard to see in this photo is that this entire surface was absolutely collapsing. It was almost as if it had some sort of impact. However, it was just deterioration for over time. And you can see that it probably started with the crack. There was differential movement in the foundation, and it caused that to basically telescope all the way into that front porch. Areas where the posts meet the concrete had significantly deteriorated to the point where the columns weren't even touching the front porch. Demo for that lean-to reveals that it was that they had tied it into the rafter tails of the existing roof and had also, kind of brought it down the side of the elevation. These things are things that we need to recreate. These are architectural details. These are some of the decorative features that need to be reproduced to make that building back to the way it was originally. And then the garage itself. Now, you're going to see this house floating, and you're going to ask a whole bunch of questions. Okay, so because of our time, the timing of application, the timing of being able to bring this before you, and the window that we had for not only the house mover, which we had a fairly narrow window to be able to work within. He comes from Nebraska. He has, obviously a very busy schedule. And then also the general contractor that we had signed up for the project had a window to start before we got bumped to the following year. So we took advantage of both of their schedules and got a little bit ahead of ourselves with the house move and some of the demos. So this house is in the air. This house is moved from its current location straight back, and you can see that it's right along the property line, and it's kind of levitating in air. This was great because it allowed us to get in and really see what was going on. So we got to look at what was buried underneath the soil, and you can see that the whole west side of that structure had completely deteriorated. The bottom plate was gone, and the bottom of the studs are, frayed from deterioration. These are things that are recoverable. These are things that we can preserve and bring back by sistering on structure, putting on a proper bottom plate, and getting this on a foundation with the proper grading so that this doesn't happen into the future. Having it up also allowed us to see the difference in height between the two sides and study that. We want this house to have all the funny little nuances, but we also want it to be structurally stable. We got to see all the 1940s fun pinups and newspaper clippings and all that cool stuff that we get to uncover when we do this with homes. And then we really got to study the doors up in the air. So to really look at the deterioration on the bottom and the areas that were partially buried, and they're in remarkably good shape. So it's really fun to be able to to be able to have the opportunity to reuse these doors. It's incredibly unique to actually have a detached structure that we can even think about reusing. Usually these things are so unsafe that we can't even occupy them. And we don't even give it a second thought. But this, and the size of it's actually really, really great. So the house got lifted. This happened last week, and this is it up on its rails. You can see that there were the hoist beams got put into place, tracks got laid all the way to the back alley, cribbing was in place to help support everything, and a single skid steer was able to move that house back. Oh, it's going to load. All right, so and there it goes. Okay, I won't bore you for 2 minutes, but it's pretty amazing. Look at how fast that goes. That's all in really good, careful planning. Okay, so there it is in its final position. This allows us to look at the foundation. This is the view that we wish we could have when we do our historic structure assessment. So we get to go in and really study the concrete foundation. We get to look at the real structure. We get to see how they embedded weird stuff in the concrete, sometimes steel tubes, sometimes wood, that were structural elements to help support this building. And it also lets us get the makeup of the concrete. The aggregate ranges anywhere from the size of my fist to cobble that you would typically see in a landscape environment, way bigger than what we would typically see in a modern foundation. Zero reinforcing and incredibly brittle, very shallow, barely even down. You know, usually we see these foundations go down at least like a foot in some of the shallow spots. Fortunately, this was a tall basement. However, we know why it was failing, mostly because this concrete was just not meant to withstand any sort of lateral pressure, and it was really starting to suffer. So you can see cross sections where they had to cut out for the hoist beams. You can see areas where it just literally fell apart. The front porch was made with, looked like it was on cobble fill, but you can see the topping slab on top of what amounts to basically like a concrete rat slab. Here's another interesting thing that we weren't able to see until we were able to pull some of the drywall down. We believe that this home was originally set on 24-inch center rafters, and at some point they came in with smooth wood and filled in at 12-inch on centers, which is highly unusual. The 24-inch on center would have been very normal. The skip sheathing, the diagonal sheathing, was also very normal. However, we do believe that every other rafter, at some point at the lifetime of this home, it seems like those got added onto, to the point where when we looked at the stairs going down into the basement and some of these other areas, we kind of wondered if maybe this wasn't the first time this house went into the air. Okay, let's talk about the budget, and this might answer some of the questions. So from a site grading and drainage perspective, when we do this much work to a foundation, it's a package deal. You can't come in and not affect the grading and drainage. When a home remains in place, what you do for grading and drainage is totally different. It's usually kind of digging out and smoothing out around the areas. This is to meet code and also to interact with the new foundation. The grading has to change. Obviously, from a foundation perspective and house move perspective, this is a big chunk of the project, and it's a really it's a big effort to get this right. It puts a solid base under a home that can last 100 years. I have very big questions about how this foundation would be maintained over the next 100 years if it was existing. roofing and waterproofing. So I think that there may have been a misunderstanding with just those words if you hadn't read the report. So if you read the narrative that I provided for the grant request, you'll see that the roofing and waterproofing is actually focused around gutters and downspouts, as well as the roof venting that's required by code. It also deals with the house wrap that goes around the outside to provide the weather resistant barrier around what will end up being a stucco top coat. Insulation and drywall. So we did have this discussion on 612 Jefferson. When we do demo and have to do, to some degree, some remediation, drywall is a critical component to the structural integrity of every home. Every structural engineer calculates drywall, and to the point where we have drywall screw inspections, because the screw pattern matters to how well the lateral movement of the home is resisting those lateral movements. Insulation, because we have fairly extensive energy codes, and we are not necessarily exempt from that because this is a historic structure. When we do this much work, we have to insulate the building, and we have to bring that up to code. Otherwise, we start to have moisture management issues within the building envelope. Things that we did exclude, which are sometimes considered or could be considered, would be the heating, cooling, plumbing, and electrical. We would love to add that in, but that doesn't feel like that's really in the spirit of this. We really want to affect the structure and what makes this building stand up. Okay, I think I answered the main points that were brought up. Gary, please ask me any questions if I didn't do that at the end. But I'm going to pause there, and I would love to invite Talbot to come up, share a little bit, and then we'll be up here to answer any questions.
Evening. My name's Talbot Wilt, and I'm at 908 on Rex Street in Louisville. As Andy mentioned earlier, I've been here before, and I think most of you and you who are joining us not in person were involved in the process with us when we did 908. Before I get too far into that, I also do want to just thank you all for the help you gave us on our last home that we did the restoration on. I hope you had a chance to come by, and if you ever want a tour now that it's been completely done and my wife's happy with the way she's done the decor, I'd be glad to give another tour. But I just want you to know, thank you very much. I know it takes a lot of work, a lot of time for all of you to look at all these proposals, and it's very important for our community to have this work, so just thanks for that. As far as my grant request goes, I love this stuff. I love restoring the old historic properties. I've restored several other properties, some not in Louisville, some in Louisville, but this will be my second attempt with a true historic project that can be landmarked. It's just so important to me that we do save some of Louisville's charm and old town character, so I'm really excited that Andy has encouraged me, and we're working well together to do this. Hopefully it won't be my last one. Back in 2019, my wife Diane and I took a huge leap of faith and bought that house at 908. And it was a wreck. It was a mess of a neglected rental property. And when you drove by it, it looked like it should be condemned. And when Elizabeth took me to look at it, as Elizabeth Martursky, I said, "Are you crazy? What are you?" And we had no idea what surprises we were going to find, such as having to replace a huge portion of the foundation, the south wall. These things we just find as we get going. But thanks to much of Andy's hand holding and constant direction and telling me, no, Talbot, that's stupid. This is not something we can do. And your help and city council's help, we were able to get through it successfully. And it's now our beautiful home, and we love it. And it's a home that we feel every day a pride of it, looking at it saying, we took that piece of junk that most people would have raised and put in a much different type of structure, maybe a duplex, triplex, who knows what would have went there, but it's now preserved for future generations thanks to the landmark designation, and I just love that. I love the challenges of the project as we're going through it. I love the satisfaction that we get at the end of it. So, as some people ask me if I'm crazy or what, I did take the leap of faith again. The house across the street, 917, became available. The project came to me because the owners had discussions with me about what I had done with 908 and said, we were going to sell 917, you're the winner. And I was like, what do you mean I'm the winner? Well, if you'll buy this one and preserve it, you can, we're giving you first right. So we took the leap of faith. Since then, I've kind of coined a joking term with my friends. It's saving Louisville's charm one house at a time. And it's kind of our feeling for it. There's no way we're going to make money on a project like this. It's something that it's a mission driven. I want to do it. Unfortunately, well, one thing really good about 917, a couple things. There's a bonus with it. It's got the historic home. It has a historic garage that's super cool. It's on a large triple lot, so we have enough room to work with it. Unfortunately, it's a piece of junk too, and it has been so neglected over the years. Although the main house is all untouched, that's good and bad in that it's in bad shape. Maybe as bad or worse, I don't know if it's worse than 908, but it's pretty bad. But I am absolutely confident, and I can assure you that with your approval and with the approval of our grant request, that we will take this property, we will create a beautiful home that will be preserved for generations future. And then as a bonus, we'll create the second studio, ADU, whatever we want to call the unit next door, but another space that is in a lot of need in Louisville for another alternative type of living situation. But the main thing is saving that property. So again, thank you. Any questions for me before I turn it back to Andy? Those who aren't here, any questions for me? Thanks.
Okay, with that, be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Andy, it's Marty. I do have a couple questions, I think. Can you clarify if the proposed budget numbers can be separated at all between the primary structure and the detached garage, as far as what costs are going towards each structure?
I can do that. I wasn't prepared to do that tonight, Marty, but we do have the budgets broken out separate between the garage and the house.
Okay, well, so I guess what I'm kind of getting at is, I think the project, and I would hope everyone else would agree that it's well deserving of being landmarked. Moving the detached garage from its original location, I completely understand and know that it does have to be moved to meet the new zoning codes. the question I have, or maybe the issue, is budget going towards the detached structure, changing it from a garage to a habitable studio as proposed is obviously going to require insulation and drywall, which it would not originally if it remained a garage. So just wondering if some of these numbers, which I don't feel are deserving, if that's the case.
So is the question about the change of use cost?
Correct.
What's the change of use cost in comparison to the cost for the house?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So the primary cost in the garage preservation, restoration, is in the foundation and structure, along with windows and doors. We are using insulation, obviously, for that building because it's required for its use. The drywall is critical. It becomes a big part of that lateral support for the building itself. So what's the difference? I think it's just a relative scale compared to the house. You know, it's probably about probably a little less than a quarter of what the house is going to cost for that budget item by itself. Does that make sense?
I believe so. Just looking through the numbers again. I guess what I'm getting at is if we're rehabilitating a historic structure as a detached garage, are we being asked to approve funds to change the use?
Well, Marty, we're also insulating an uninsulated building. The house is an uninsulated building.
Correct. I have no issue with insulating the primary structure. It's the detached garage and the budget going towards insulating the garage, which it would not require if it remained a garage.
Okay.
Correct. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I have no issue with the primary structure, the requirement to insulate and drywall. It's just changing the use of the detached garage to a studio, which will then require obviously insulation and drywall. And if that number is part of this budget that we're being asked to approve.
Is there a question that you want me to respond to, or is that just a comment?
That was just a comment.
Okay, all right.
I don't know what anyone else feels about it or not, but.
Thank you. That's certainly something that we can discuss as commissioners. But thank you for the information there, Andy. Are there other questions for Andy or the applicant? No? Okay, so if there's no other questions, thank you once
Yeah,
again.
so before I sit down, one thing I would like to add to that, just for your consideration. Lots of homes, lots of buildings throughout Louisville's history have been repurposed into different uses, and that's just been our heritage. We're a pretty utilitarian kind of group. I think given our current situation with our housing needs, I think also the ability to repurpose a building into something that is needed, whereas this as a garage is, you know, by all practical standards, probably
really small. I do want you to take into consideration that there is sort of a higher purpose to this, and that, you know, looking at it in isolation of just a simple change of use might not be the full story. So I do want that housing component to be considered.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Talbot. Are there any comments from the public, in person or online, about these resolutions? No, doesn't seem so. We did receive 3 public comments in writing, which the commission has had time to consider. So it's always nice to see the public writing in with how they feel about these different public hearings and the requests. So I'm sure everybody had a chance to review those. Okay, so why don't we move on to the discussion by commission members? And we, just to clarify, so we need to discuss each one separately, correct? Or can we just do a general discussion and then move on to each motion?
You can do them either way, just note that their criteria are separate for each one, so.
Right. So it might make sense to, so the different grant requests are dependent upon landmarking. So perhaps it's most straightforward to just discuss the landmarking for the property as a whole, which again does include the house and the garage. So commissioners, how do we feel about landmarking 917 Rex?
It seems pretty straightforward to me, given the condition of the house, you know, and how well preserved it is compared to the original condition, so.
I like the idea of preserving this house, landmarking it, and I like the proposed changes that have been made. As most of you fellow commissioners heard, my concerns were more about how the grant request was constructed, what's part of it, and it's not necessarily in any reflection on the request. It's that maybe we haven't decided some of those things among ourselves, because a lot of those specific areas we have discussed, but we haven't necessarily had a consistent way to deal with them. Interiors, roofing, I do realize you were talking about the half-round gutters that don't exist now. It clearly didn't exist now, and it is consistent with maybe that time period, even if they weren't used. But the idea of saving it, that's a good thing.
I also agree this is a very strong candidate for landmarking.
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of landmarking.
Is that Linda? Go ahead, Linda. Oh. Linda, would you like to say more about why you're in favor of landmarking? I'm not sure if you're glitching or got cut off. Okay. In the meantime, well, we have a text. So as I was saying, I think this is a really strong candidate. As was stated, this is a charming neighborhood, and there are a lot of bungalows in that area, and keeping another bungalow really adds to the continuity of the neighborhood. This bungalow I've noted for years, and I'm not going to know the architectural term, but as you mentioned, the surfboards on the side, you know, is a different era from the original structure. It's, I think it's a good use of our program to landmark this, as also was noted in the Paleo West survey. So I'm happy to see this happen.
Yes, and again, I agree. I think it's a great candidate for landmarking.
Would anybody like to make a motion to landmark the property?
I would move to Landmark 917 Rex.
I'll second. Yeah.
And can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Whidden,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Bocamp,
Yes.
and Chair Haley.
I'll take the thumbs up as a yes. Okay. Thank you. So let's move on to the alteration certificates. So there's 2 alteration certificates, one for the home, one for the garage.
Excuse me, Christine.
Yes,
Is it all right if I move up here so I can hear better?
of course. Yes, of course. I'll try to speak louder as well. So what are our thoughts on the alteration certificates?
They both seem pretty straightforward to me and reasonable in the context of the project. So,
Right.
The profile of the proposed structures is very consistent with the existing, in fact, amazingly so, to get so much more use out of the property. I think it's a good direction.
Right, I would agree. I think the additions are thoughtful, there's good differentiation. It is also nice, as was noted, to see the lower than average Florida area ratio, given what could have been done on the property. So I think to me, the alterations seem very thoughtful and well done.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, we just had a big storm come through and I don't know what happened. But I think the moving of the garage, that was kind of a concern, but I think that's a fine alteration. The foundation needs to be redone anyway, and if they're moving it and be changed anyway, I think that just makes sense to appropriately. So did it go out? So I think that's a fine alteration too, just to, sorry.
I think we got the gist of it. Okay. Amelia, just kind of a point of procedure for us. So the chair is here. The chair doesn't usually make motions, but can I make motions as well? Because I'm running the meeting, but I'm not the chair. So can I also make motions?
I do not know the answer to that question, so let's not,
Okay.
just in case.
Okay. I'd like to stump you, Amelia. You're welcome. Okay. Okay. Would a commissioner like to make a motion on the alteration certificates?
I'll make a motion to approve the alteration certificates.
I'd second that.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Whidden,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Bocamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as to the grant request, just once again, the grant would fall under the preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation guidelines, and requested is $162,000, $162,446. I just want to also thank staff and the applicant and architect for working so closely together on this. This was a really informative and helpful packet I found as a commissioner to try to break out these costs and what's going towards what. So thank you for that. A couple of points of discussion came up and were addressed by the architect and applicant. So I'd love to hear what the commissioners feel on those. I think we left off with Marty with maybe the use, we can discuss here, the use of those funds to insulate the garage in addition to the primary structure.
Right. I guess I was just questioning whether changing, and again, I have no issues with changing the use from a garage to an accessory studio, a habitable space. my question is whether changing the use is resulting in work, and is that work extraordinary circumstances?
And I think I would tend to agree with Marty also, just in terms of when we are talking about extraordinary circumstances, just making sure that we're parceling it out and thinking about all those details because it is a large amount of excess funding. So I think it's definitely something to consider because, like Marty said, if it was just to be a garage, we would not have to insulate it or do drywall. And so as far as rehabilitation and restoration, that would be the original use and intention of the building. And so anything above that would be, I would think, would be extra that would be up to the homeowner to want to do. So that's kind of, I think that was a really good point.
I could also, however, somewhat see it as falling under preservation in that if this were to not be insulated, or I suppose the homeowner could pay on their own to insulate it, but we're incentivizing insulating of this and thus incentivizing maintaining this historic garage. As is, it could not be used as well. It could not be, it could not be used as a garage, as garages are used today per se. It could use as storage perhaps. So if we want this to remain as it looked with the doors, the windows, the siding, adding insulation to it is allowing it to be more usable. I also it's not under preservation, but it is under the city's long-term goal to have more housing, affordable housing in the city. This is a large lot. It's a three house lot. So this could have quite a bit more housing on it. And it won't, but it will with this being used as an ADU, with being insulated. So I know it doesn't cleanly fall under perhaps preservation, but in my mind it is related. And I also should have asked a question with that number for insulation. I think it's $27,000 insulation and drywall. And it's gonna help me understand, and I should have asked this, Andy, but does that cost go towards the new additions on the back of the house itself, or no, is that parceled out? So this would be for insulation drywall for the existing structures, okay. So again, proportionally a smaller number, more of it would go towards the house, but okay.
I think too, though, even if it was just storage, like storage doesn't need to be insulated. So again, like I agree wholeheartedly, like we want and need extra housing, but I don't know that that's historic preservation's role to fund the insulation and drywall that creates more housing as much as it is to save the structures themselves. So just to kind of throw that out for discussion.
I think my first instinct is to agree with Linda's point. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head the dimensions of that garage, but there are similar garages being used for real life cars nowadays here in Louisville. I walk by them all the time. So like, I don't know that, so preserving the structure up to the point that it would cost to use as a garage, I think makes sense. I think it makes sense to approve funding for that. Beyond that, I don't know. So.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to, what part of this is restoration. If it's changing to something else, it's not restoration. It's not rehabilitation if it's different. We are preserving the whole structure, so you could look at that aspect of it by these add-ons, a new foundation, adding structurally to it by putting drywall in the house. But we have had the discussion before. Linda probably remembers that interior work like that was generally not included.
Well, I think it is when it's structural, because I know we did have a house that had kind of the same thing where they did foundational and like flooring, and we did approve for the drywall because it's structural. And so anytime they move the floors and like readjust it, that has to be also done in order for the building to be sound, basically. So I think in the main building, absolutely that the drywall is necessary and the insulation even for code and everything. I think that's something that we would approve, not like painting or new cabinets in the kitchen or that kind of thing, but definitely like structural things, which we've heard in the past. And again, tonight, that drywall is absolutely structural. So that is true. And I think that's different than other interior aspects.
Thanks.
Staff also had some hesitations with, or did not recommend funds for the site grading and drainage, which Andy addressed why that money is being requested. So we should discuss how we feel about funds towards those items.
I guess I didn't quite understand what Andy was speaking on as far as when you move a house as opposed to not moving a house and needing grading. I'm a big believer that grading is vitally important and should be included in a grant like this. I think whether you move the house or you don't, I think you need to address the grading on all of these old town lots that are relatively flat to start with and are what's resulting in the poor foundations to begin with. So I would actually like to see the grading, drainage be included in some of these grant requests moving forward.
I think we have traditionally included grading and drainage in a lot of grants.
And I also found Andy's explanation pretty compelling, that because the entire foundation needs to be replaced, that bringing everything up to code and allowing for what's required for that new foundation, it's sort of part of that scope. There's no choice around it, and the way that you do it is different in that context, so.
And I agree. I think the grading is important. I think we've seen that on previous structures as well. I mean, really just for the viability of the structure in the future. If the drainage, that's a lot of why there's the deterioration in the first place that we're seeing, especially on this structure, is just drainage. And so I think that seems like a reasonable, and it's not a high price item. So I think that's a good way to just invest in the future. So I don't have an issue with the drainage.
Just want to pause for a second. Keith, is there anything you'd like to say about these two topics or a different topic that came up?
No, I agree with you guys. Being a geek engineer, I agree that the drainage is critical. And I like to see that done on all these properties because as I saw with my own home, that's what caused the damage on our west side of the building. Now, I do agree that moving the garage is probably not extraordinary cost, but I do like to see a property or a building repurposed versus being stripped, just taken down. So I don't have a problem with it being used as a ADU or whatever they're going to do with it.
Thank you, Keith.
And then Gary, did you have any more roofing to discuss?
No, I do recall that Andy mentioned that they were adding some half-round guttering as opposed to regular roofing. I don't know if regular roofing is included also, because you probably wouldn't usually, no? But that, if that's a net add, then it also is hard to say that that's, well, that would be preservation. I guess that would work. And not a huge line item. More, was the question of moving the garage, and if that's still preserving it. By putting in a new foundation, yeah. I'm not sure answer that.
Well, it sounded like the current foundation was not in good condition. Wasn't that correct?
Yes, for both structures. That's what
Right.
was my takeaway. Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, the structural assessment said it's difficult to tell if the garage is supported by a foundation. So it's hard to compare before and after.
Right. However, I think when it was lifted, they were able to speak to that more and see that it wasn't. You go, Andy. Can Andy come on up and speak?
So we believe it was sitting on dirt, and they poured a slab on the inside. We know that now because we got to see it. So something else that I forgot to mention, there were no anchor bolts holding the house down to its foundation. Another indication maybe that thing was in the air at one point.
Oh, cool.
But no anchor bolts is a huge problem. No rebar. Of course, no reinforcing, but we wouldn't expect that for that age of a home. So.
Okay, thank you. Right, so it made sense to me to move the home certainly, as well as the garage, and do that foundation work to preserve the structures.
One last comment from me. I just find it interesting when we're moving these homes. Typically, we don't have the size of lot that this project has, where you can actually move the structures back on the property. As we saw with the front street, I forget the address now, but they were proposing just to lift it up and then excavate underneath. So obviously, it's probably more to lift the house and slide it back, but then it makes excavation and new foundation work easier. So I'm sure there's a balance there, but I think it's pretty fortunate that they had the room to move the structures back on the property to do the foundation correctly.
Right, I think that's a good point, Marty. Wonder if we'll ever see how many more of these we'll see where they can move structures on the lot. Probably not too many more. So when we look at the grant request as a whole, are there other? It seems like we've hit the discussion points that were concerns. And it seems like most of those have been addressed, but the drywall insulation is a bit of a sticking point. So as a commission, I'm looking at the difference in cost. It seems like we want to add in the site grading and drainage. It's about $1,750. So we can either just add that on to what the grant request was by the applicants, the 162,000 plus. But we need to make a decision. We do need to make a decision if we want to keep the drywall insulation in there or remove that from this grant request. So procedurally, I think that's, we just maybe decide as a group, or we could do those. Should we do a roll call for adding in the grading, or no? We would just kind of talk it through.
Yeah, so procedurally, just whenever you're ready, whenever somebody's ready to make a motion, they would specify what they wanted that motion to say. So in this case, like let's say you wanted to add the site drainage or grading, then you would say in the amount of whatever it is, and then see if you can get a second off of that. And not putting it like, site grading vote, like do it all together. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
Not explaining it super well, but
Yeah, thank you. It
it's
does.
good as one package, yep.
The motion is a whole package, but we need to figure out where we land.
I have a question about that might help. Can an argument be made that the insulation and drywall is part of preserving the garage structure just as a structure, having nothing to do with the change of use? That's
I
my
don't,
question.
I don't think it can.
Okay. I just
I
wanted,
feel like,
yeah, okay.
We just wouldn't be drywall. Yeah. Would you like Andy to answer that question, or is that for the commission?
I mean, either. Anybody who wants to speak to it.
Yeah, so
I
Marty
guess.
says no, probably not, and I tend to agree, because it wouldn't need drywall then, or insulation.
I mean, you see garages all the time that are drywalled and insulated, but this one originally is not.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's also falling down. So, I mean, yeah, let's, to be fair, these buildings not treated properly have issues. So I think the issue is more around the use of it turning into conditioned space. Not to say that you couldn't condition a garage as it is, it just wouldn't function very well. I think really, honestly, you guys are dealing with a philosophical issue, not a structural issue here. And so I think you guys need to come get good with that to figure out what's the benefit to the greater whole with this this effort that we're making to turn this building into something that has a second life. Because to be honest, it would be a lot easier just to do a whole brand new building than to go through this effort. And I mean that's not a ransom note. That is just the hard facts around preservation versus new construction. So it kind of becomes this balance of keep it or lose it. And we want to keep it. We feel like this is worth the effort. And Talbot has mentioned in many words, philosophically, this is important for him as an owner. This is important from his perspective for the city to have a property that feels like the way it did. And so there's an emotional aspect to this, like there is with any historic preservation project. We do this because it is emotionally good. It is not for any other reason. So I think if we can look at it through that lens, we can determine whether the further use of this building has a second life as a dwelling unit, or does it really have to be a garage to have that use? I'm not really hearing people argue that issue. I think really it's just the nuances around what do you want to fund. And so, as you have heard time and time again, and I think you would hear from Talbot, there is a huge motivation emotionally to preserve these buildings. This grant program is so special because it makes it tangible and it makes it real. And it allows us to kind of cross the barrier to say, okay, we're going to make a lot more effort, spend a lot more time trying to do this, but we're going to end up with something really special. So ultimately, that's the balance. And that's what you guys have to figure out philosophically.
Yeah, I do appreciate,
Go ahead.
I do appreciate that we have a chance to preserve it, and you're right, we we feel very hamstrung the times we can't do something.
I think too, it's important with extraordinary circumstances, when they're big numbers, it's easy just to, I mean, after, you know, $100,000 or whatever, it's easy just to be like, oh, that's not a big deal or whatever. So I think that's part of, maybe not a philosophical, but more of a practical budget piece too, is just making sure that we um, are being careful and just looking at everything thoroughly. We have a lot of potential grants coming through with different projects, and I don't think it's ever a bad idea to question things when they're, I mean, extraordinary circumstances is a big deal. Like it's a big above normal grant funding, and I think it's our obligation to look at it carefully. So yeah, so I don't feel, I think even if it's a cool garage, and I think even if it was repurposed as a storage unit, like that would still be a benefit to the applicant, and it would still be good. And we are paying to potentially, I mean, if this is all approved, we'd be paying to move it, to rehabilitate it, to redo windows and, you know, the doors. And so it's not that we're saying no to everything. It's more of to me just making sure that we're paying for what we are supposed to pay as a historic preservation commission with our fund. So that's I think it was a good insight from Marty to kind of point that out. So
And I think ultimately we're talking about what, 1 or 2% of the total grant that's being asked for. I don't know. That's why I asked if there was a breakout of what the drywall and installation costs for the garage structure was going to be. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a whole lot. And again, I just don't think it's extraordinary circumstances. We'd love to see the garage be rehabilitated, the structure itself, maintain that detached garage look. No issues whatsoever changing the use. I just don't feel that it's extraordinary circumstances that we should approve grant money to change the use.
Well, let's do this, because I think we could probably spend a lot more time on this, and I think, you know, Talbot and I definitely hear your points, and I think the discussion has been great because, you know, we keep kind of pushing the limits of what this grant program is intended to support. And I know that, you know, as a commission, you guys are really looking at, you know, what's the next step for this program. So, you know, Marty, you're absolutely right. You know, we are talking about a relatively small amount in the grand scheme of things. And you know, and I don't have the numbers to break it out. I know it's not necessarily like a quarter of the cost, but if we just said it was like at 25% of the extraordinary circumstance, so the total for that line item is $55,226. If we were to take 75% of that and then split that in half and just really focus on that going towards the house, not the studio, I mean, would that feel comfortable to the group? That would equal approximately, well, it would equal $6,903 minus $6,903 from the total amount. It's actually $6,903.25. If you want to, if you're okay rounding.
I actually had in my head somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. So I think you're spot on with what you're coming up with. And I personally would be comfortable with that.
Okay.
I agree with that. Thank you for offering that, Andy.
You're welcome. Does that? So we're offering that as a formal proposal to you to consider as a motion, and use that $6,903 number as a subtraction from the total requested amount.
I think that sounds reasonable.
I would agree as well. Would somebody like to make a formal motion on that?
Can I ask one question
Sure.
before we do that? So we're talking about though, but staff recommendation was like 152. We're going to add back into that up to the original amount that they requested and then subtract 6,000 and change. So it's
That
gonna
is my
wind up-
understanding.
Yeah, so it's going to wind up being a little bit more than the staff recommendation in the end.
Right. Yes, and it also will be a little more than the staff recommendation. We'll be adding the grading and drainage,
Yeah.
which is 1750. Or what, sorry, 1175.
Yeah. So.
So it would basically be the 162, which is the total requested, minus that 6,900, right?
Yes, that's my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the staff recommendation, sorry to jump in, but the staff recommendation, it subtracts the site grading and also the exterior, there's two other categories, exterior appendages and details, which was related to the front porch and sort of general architectural details. So if you wanted to include that, then it would be what you just described, which is the 162 and change minus 6903. That would be the answer. But if you wanted to exclude it, as staff's recommendation is obviously completely up to you, then the math is a little bit different, and I'd have to just do it real quick. But it would basically be 154 plus 1,000 something minus 6,000 something.
Right. And I think that's what.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about the exterior appendages and details.
We did not. Right. So I'm trying to find that in here.
Right. So, and that staff just, and which would probably be accurate, because that's things that are not, it's not above and beyond what would be on a normal Louisville property as far as.
Yes. Do you want me to bring that? I can bring up the application description if that's helpful for those pieces on the screen. Okay, let me grab that right now.
Yeah, because again, I think this is where it's that extraordinary that we have to keep kind of coming back to. Because there's already 40 that could potentially go towards exterior appendages and exterior details and all that. So like as far as like allocating specific, like that 40 to specific things, then some like that could potentially fall under that 40,000.
Okay, so do you want me to use that one instead? Okay. Yeah. All right, so first one is exterior appendages. Okay, so I'm going to read this. Proposal to remove the plywood floor, investigate the floor framing and repair and replace as necessary. Proposal to remove the columns and railings and replace the columns with tapered columns to match the historic appearance. Proposal to add structural elements to properly support the roof and repair or replace the ceiling. And that's all for the front porch. And then exterior details. Proposal to replace the soffit and fascia throughout with matching historic sizes and locations. Proposal to repair, restore, and replace the window and door trim, frieze board, and skirt board. Proposal to add new corner trim. So again, front porch, and then this piece is trim throughout the structures.
So I guess that's a question too of all the items listed, the requests are generally well, I guess that's my question is like, do we figure out like, okay, what is the original $40,000 going to specifically in the project? And then everything above and beyond that is the extraordinary circumstance, or do we just lump it all together? You know what I mean?
Right. And
Um,
for the sake of this discussion, it seems we've been lumping it all together.
Right. And so, and if that's the case, then like, then that original 40 would go towards the exterior, that exterior work. Like that would be the thing that we would normally pay for in a preservation grant. And so therefore we would pay for it now and say, yeah, that's fine. That's the normal stuff that we would normally pay for. And then anything above that will, you know, so that could be an argument too of just saying like that falls under the regular part of the grant that we would have given you anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so the way I have been doing these spreadsheets for extraordinary circumstances, if you look at the application packet, particularly the narrative letter, however, the spreadsheet is within that as well. I have a column that says fund request for typical items. And what I mean by that is, you know, what we would typically see. Under exterior details, for example, I have $4,000 that would typically be done under the normal grant request. Now, one of the, you know, key words in our narrative in the application is throughout, right? We're not just going through and like, oh, board here, board there. It's like throughout. And the problem with, you know, wood on a stucco building with no weather protective barrier is that that wood can't survive. Like it doesn't work. It doesn't, it's not able to stand the test of time. So we are really replacing throughout. I hoped that in my presentation and showing you the condition of that front porch, that whole front porch is toast. It's gone, and the columns are completely deteriorated to where we're actually having to replace everything from the roof down. So, and it's a little bit bigger porch by comparison to some of the more typical porches that we have around Louisville. I would not say it's a huge front porch by, you know, comparison to maybe a newer standard, but it is a decent sized porch with a lot of damage, and it is really bad. So, you know, when we talk about size and how it affects extraordinary circumstances, size is also scope. So if you look at that just as a single item, that scope of work just for that one item for the appendage is pretty intense. And you fortunately have like the absolute, you know, proof that that is the case because you can see it. You know, it's just crumbled and deteriorated. So anyway,
Sorry, you got, Talbot, you need to speak into the microphone. I'm sorry.
I was just adding, because I want to make sure everybody understood this part, was that what Andy's describing, that porch circumstance, somewhere along historically they had put plywood over everything on that porch. So until the demo part started, that was unforeseen. We had no idea what was underneath there. One of those surprises that you go, oh. So, just to clarify.
we had a feeling, but now we know. So anyway, I do want to make sure that that got said in the discussion. And by the way, Christine, thank you for leaving the mic open. I appreciate it. You didn't formally close the hearing, but thanks for the opportunity to have this discussion.
Yeah.
This is productive, and so thank you.
Right. I think it is, again, for all of us, as these extraordinary circumstances come up, there's nuance to everyone. So the discussions are helpful to everybody. So thank you.
And I think seeing the breakdown, I think that answers the question as far as allocating it for, I think that chart does a good job of clearing up the exterior for me. So I think I'm fine with that. But we need to discuss it to make sure. So I will make a motion. Can you hear me still? No.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve resolution 6 or 7 or whatever it is for the grant amount of the, I'm not getting the numbers right. 162,000 minus the 6,900. Those are rough numbers, but is that okay?
Yeah, yes, that's fine. So I'll just say the numbers. So you're taking the total applicant request minus the 6,903. That equals $155,543. So that's what you'd be.
Perfect. And that is the number, the 6,900 is for the garage insulation and drywall.
Correct. Yes, that's an important point. Yeah. So can you please just restate the motion for the record?
Yes. I move that we approve resolution number 6 or 7 in the amount of, do you want me to say those numbers again? Shoot.
Yeah.
I didn't write them down. I'm sorry.
No, that's
I don't
okay.
do motions usually. I was like, I'll do a motion, and now I'm
Here,
like,
I'll say it, and then you just say yes. So just to make it super clear and put it all in one spot. So the amount, so the amount would be 155,543, and the Exhibit A for the grant would remove the insulation for the garage. That's the specific piece that is not being recommended. So those two pieces. Okay.
yes, that's correct.
And this would be a resolution with the condition as stated with those two caveats.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would second that.
And can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Whidden,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. Yes. Did you hear me?
Yes, we did. Thank you. Okay, so we have approved the landmarking, the alteration certificates, and the grant request. So I'm very excited about the work being done in this house. I'm sorry I wasn't there to see it moved. If I'd known, I would have come by. It's pretty cool, the video. So we'll have to keep an eye on it and see how it goes. Good luck.
Thank you so much for your help.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, all of you. Appreciate you being good stewards of the city's taxpayers' money and the money that comes to this. It's gonna come out great. We'll love it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, take care. We have some items from staff.
Yeah, just briefly. So the usual updates, no alteration certificates this past month. There was a demolition review for 533 and 421 East. And that was because there was a public hearing in 2023. They didn't pull a permit. And so we don't have this functionally, but it was functionally sort of like a renewal of that demolition review from last year. So otherwise, no subcommittee movements. And then the other piece is that the next regular meeting is August 19th, the third Monday of August. And so otherwise, that's it. There are items scheduled. There's at least one case and ideally a grant update as well. So, but that's it. Thank you.
Any questions for staff? No? I have a quick question. We had talked about, I think 2 meetings ago, our retreat and the work plan there, and commissioners had shared some thoughts on those. And thank you again for bringing that to us. And we were going to have that brought back for further discussion. Do we have any idea when that might be?
On the grant update specifically?
Grant updates?
Right,
Mhm.
yes, okay, yeah. So, yeah, it was original last month, hoping that it would be this month, planning now for August. And again, that procedurally, or like just how we're thinking about it is bringing another discussion direction, but with actually some concrete grant or resolution language update for you all to work through based on that prior discussion.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any updates from commission members?
I have just a small one. So I'm the liaison to the Museum Advisory Board, and I go to their meetings every other month because they meet every other month. I'm not going to be able to go to the next one because I'm going to be in transit. So I'm just letting you guys know if there's anything that we want to share with them. And I already let Gigi Yang know that I won't be there, and to let us know if there's anything relevant that comes up. So.
Okay, thank you. So with no other updates from commissioners,
Thanks for leading tonight, Chrissy. I appreciate it.
you're welcome. My pleasure. Hope everybody's who's traveling is having a nice trip, and still attending. So thank you. So would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn our meeting this evening.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Night, guys.
Recording stop.